Chapter 1. The Voice Before the Words. There is a kind of silence that most people never hear in their lifetime. Not the absence of noise, but the silence beneath it, the kind that lives behind your thoughts, the kind that listens before you ever learn to speak. It isn't religious, though the temples have chased it. It isn't scientific, though the equations point to it. It is deeper, older, closer. It is the space where your mind ends and your power begins. And once you learn to access it, you stop asking the universe for permission. You stop begging for change. You begin to command reality through intention that vibrates like a tuning fork into the fabric of time. Most people pray from weakness. They fold their hands as if making themselves small will make their request more holy. They whisper hope into the dark and wait to be saved. But the universe, this quantum field that we call empty, is not listening to the words of your prayer. It is listening to the frequency of your being. It is listening to the emotional truth behind the sound. You cannot fool it. You cannot charm it. You can only align with it. And when you do, when your inner state matches the outcome you desire, it stops being a prayer. It becomes a law. The ancients understood this. They had no microphones, no neuroscience, no particle accelerators. But they knew. They knew the voice inside them was not echo, but signal. They spoke not to an external God but to the intelligence woven into the fabric of creation itself. The same intelligence that tells a seed to become a tree, that tells light how to bend, that tells atoms how to dance. And now, modern physics is catching up to what mystics have whispered for millennia. That the observer influences the observed, that the intention behind the experiment shapes the result, that the line between mind and matter is not a wall, it is a mirror. So the question is not, will the universe hear my prayer? The question is, can I become the frequency of the answer? Because that's the true secret, the one buried under doctrines and rituals and mantras and myths. Prayer is not what you do. Prayer is what you become. And what you become, you begin to attract, not by pleading, but by resonance. Nikola Tesla said, if you want to understand the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. But what does that mean in a life filled with deadlines and heartbreaks, addictions and bills? It means you stop outsourcing your power. It means you stop waiting for evidence before you choose who to be. It means you start broadcasting a signal of such coherence that the world around you has no choice but to reorganize. When Thomas Edison failed 10,000 times trying to invent the electric light, he wasn't praying for luck. He was becoming the kind of consciousness through which light could be delivered. Every failed prototype was a refinement of alignment. Every setback was a sharpening of signal. He didn't collapse when it didn't work, because he wasn't working from hope. He was working from knowing, from resonance. And resonance doesn't need applause. It creates results. And if you're honest, you've felt this before. That moment before something incredible happens, where something clicks inside you before the world responds. When you knew you'd get the job. When you knew they'd call. When you knew something was about to shift. It wasn't magic. It wasn't chance. It was coherence. You briefly became the version of yourself that already had what you wanted. And the universe, never biased, simply followed suit. Because this field doesn't play favorites, it plays frequencies. But here's the cost. You can't fake coherence. You can't slap positive words on a foundation of fear and call it prayer. You can't say, I am abundant, while clinging to thoughts of lack and expect to be heard. The field does not respond to language. It responds to emotional truth. You must become the signal before you receive the broadcast. You must embody the outcome before it exists. That is not delusion. That is not denial. That is the very structure of reality responding to its own mirror. And this is where most people fail. They pray with their lips while doubting with their hearts. They ask for change while rehearsing suffering. They say, I believe, but act from hesitation. And the universe, impartial and exact, gives them more of what they are. Not what they want, what they are. Carnegie didn't build steel by asking for wealth. He thought as wealth. He moved as wealth. He saw opportunity where others saw risk because he had tuned his mind to a reality that was not yet visible, but already inevitable. He did not wait for confirmation. He built as if success was obligated to arrive. And that internal certainty was the prayer. A silent, thunderous command into the field of creation. This is what quantum prayer is. Not a sentence whispered into space, but an identity claimed in advance. And it begins the moment you stop chasing answers and start becoming the answer. When you stop reaching for proof and start radiating truth. When you stop reacting and start transmitting. You do not ask for peace. You become peaceful. You do not ask for love. You become love. You do not ask for healing. You become the healed. And through that becoming, your signal changes. And when your signal changes, so does everything else. The field cannot resist congruence. So no, this is not about religion. This is not about pleasing a god or unlocking a cosmic vending machine. This is about taking radical ownership of your frequency and aligning it with what you say you desire. This is about recognizing that the real prayer is not a cry for help. It is a declaration of identity. And that declaration cannot come from ego. It cannot come from arrogance or desperate control. It must come from presence, from clarity, from the stillness beneath your thoughts where you remember that you are not separate from creation. You are a node of creation itself. That the universe is not outside you, judging and granting favors. It is in you, responding in real time to who you choose to become. You are not here to earn your miracles. You are here to match them. And the moment you do, you will not need to beg for alignment. You will become the signal that alignment finds. You will not need to ask for signs. You will become the sign. You will not pray for power. You will remember it. Because the greatest prayer you will ever say has no words. It is the silence of coherence. It is the stillness of knowing. It is the unwavering frequency of a being who no longer waits. And now, the field listens. Chapter 2. Mindset, the container that shapes reality. Before anything manifests, before the prayer is heard, before the action bears fruit, before the universe echoes back your intention, something deeper must take shape. Not in the outside world, but within the hidden corridors of your own awareness. That shape is mindset, and no amount of strategy, luck, or force can compensate for the limits of a mind that was never prepared to receive what it says it wants. You cannot outwork your worldview. You cannot outperform your paradigm. Because your mindset is the container through which reality is filtered, and if the container is small, cracked, or poisoned by old beliefs, then everything you pour into it, energy, effort, prayer, will become distorted. The tragedy of modern existence is not that people aim too high and fail. It's that they aim low and succeed, because their minds have been trained not to believe in anything beyond survival. They believe in paying bills, in getting through the week, in being realistic, in doing what's expected, in following the familiar, and then they wonder why life feels numb, narrow, void of magic. But the mind is not passive. It is not a mirror. It is a projector. What you believe becomes what you see, and what you repeatedly see becomes what you build. And if you do not challenge the assumptions that shaped your perception, you will unconsciously recreate the very patterns you're trying to escape. It is not enough to ask the universe for more. You must become the kind of vessel that can carry more. And that begins with mindset. Look back at the thinkers and builders who defied their time, not because they had special access to tools we don't, but because they thought differently about what was possible. When Henry Ford said, "I will build a car for the great multitude," he wasn't echoing an industry trend. He was rewriting the mental blueprint of value, access, and innovation. His factories weren't just mechanical innovations. They were manifestations of a mindset that refused to accept the elitist status quo. He didn't just change transportation. He changed the mental ceiling of an era. And that ceiling still exists, not in technology, but in minds that refuse to expand. Because here's what most people don't realize. The universe is not responding to what you want. It is responding to what you expect. And your expectations are encoded deep in your mindset, not in your words. You can say, "I believe I will succeed," but if your inner dialogue is rooted in doubt, if your nervous system still flinches at the idea of abundance, if your thoughts are laced with inherited limits from people who never did what you're trying to do, then your mindset will silently override your spoken desire. This is not punishment. This is precision. Reality reflects back the dominant signal, And your mindset is the frequency generator. It determines what you notice, what you ignore, what you pursue, what you sabotage, what you allow, what you block. A limited mindset walks into a room full of possibility and finds proof of impossibility. An expansive mindset walks into the same room and sees leverage, access, connection, openings. Same room, same world, different frequency. And the real danger is that most people never update their mindset after childhood. They inherit their beliefs about money, love, power, and identity before they can critically assess them, and then spend decades living inside a reality designed by the unhealed wounds, outdated fears, and untested assumptions of their environment. This isn't their fault, but it is their responsibility. Because at some point, you either keep repeating the unconscious program you didn't choose, or you interrupt it. You take control of the code. You rewrite the frame. This is not about blind positivity or delusional optimism. It is about mental engineering. And like any engineering, it takes work. It takes attention. It takes brutal honesty. You have to audit your thoughts like you would audit a company. What ideas are generating returns? What beliefs are costing you growth? Where are you investing energy in fear, conflict, complaint, and self-sabotage? Where are you defending patterns that no longer serve your vision? If you don't interrogate these things, they will quietly become your prison. And make no mistake, the walls of that prison are not built of facts. They're built of interpretations. A closed mindset can take a temporary setback and turn it into a lifelong excuse. An open mindset can take a door slammed shut and turn it into a blueprint for reinvention. The difference is not in luck, nor in genetics. The difference is in internal architecture. One mind folds. One mind adapts. One sees failure as identity. One sees failure as data. Same experience. Different frame. Your job is not to control everything. Your job is to install a mindset that responds to the uncontrollable with creativity instead of collapse. And yes, this means leaving behind the comfort of certainty. The familiar is seductive even when it's toxic. But mindset transformation requires that you walk willingly into the unknown, not with fear, but with curiosity. With the question, what if I've been wrong about what's possible? What if the rules I've lived by are outdated? What if everything I thought I knew about my limits is simply a reflection of the beliefs I never questioned? Because that questioning is the birth of power. Not the loud, external kind, but the silent, internal kind, the kind that rewires your operating system without needing approval. That kind of power is not about domination. It's about direction. It's the power to steer your mind instead of being steered by it. The power to respond, not react. To choose, not drift. To think, not recycle. And from that place, everything changes. Not instantly. Not magically. But structurally. You stop interpreting challenge as threat and begin seeing it as feedback. You stop waiting for validation and start honoring your own alignment. You stop trying to force the world to bend and instead begin bending yourself toward alignment with the world you're building inside. Mindset is not a trend. It is not a buzzword. It is not a weekend workshop. It is the long-term recalibration of your perception, attention, and interpretation. And until it shifts, no amount of strategy will save you. You will sabotage your own expansion. You will pray for things you're not prepared to receive. You will dream without building the container to hold the dream. So if you want to pray powerfully, if you want to speak to the quantum field and be heard, begin with your mind. Not just what you think, but how you think about thinking. Are your thoughts building your future or defending your past? Are you interpreting life in a way that makes you more powerful or more passive? Because mindset is not just the beginning. It is the gatekeeper of everything that comes after. Chapter 3. Belief, the signal that shapes the field. Before reality changes, before a new result emerges, before a different life begins to take shape around you, there is one thing that must shift, not in the outer world, but in the frequency you carry through your belief. Belief is not an opinion. It is not a thought you repeat to feel good in the morning. It is not a poster quote or a motivational buzzword. Belief is energetic architecture. It is the signature signal you send into the quantum field the electromagnetic expression of your inner conviction, and it determines what life reflects back to you, moment by moment, without fail, without mercy, and without exception. The universe does not respond to what you want. It responds to what you expect. And expectation is not conscious hope. It is subconscious belief. You may say, I am worthy, but if the belief underneath that sentence is, I am not enough unless I prove myself constantly, then the field will respond to that underlying code, not the words on top. Because the quantum field, like a mirror, does not reflect what you pretend to be. It reflects what you actually are, in thought, in emotion, in vibration. This is why prayer without belief becomes superstition. Why affirmations without inner congruence become noise. Why strategy without certainty collapses under pressure. The field is not manipulated by technique. It is moved by truth. And belief is the root of truth in motion. It is the invisible engine driving everything you do, whether you realize it or not. How you show up, what you pursue, how long you stay in the game, and how much you think you deserve to win. When you trace the stories of extraordinary humans, not just the icons we admire, but the quiet builders, the healers, the rebels who change systems from the inside, you'll always find a belief system that preceded the success. Walt Disney believed in magic long before any investor believed in him. He was rejected by bankers, laughed out of offices, told his dreams were foolish, but none of it mattered, because the outer rejections were simply noise compared to the internal reality he had already committed to. His belief wasn't theory. It was identity. He didn't need the world to believe first. He went first. And this is what separates those who shape reality from those who observe it. The ability to hold belief long enough for reality to catch up. Not faith in the abstract sense, but energetic certainty. The kind of belief that bends probability not because it begs, but because it broadcasts so clearly, so consistently, that the quantum field reorganizes in obedience to it. This is not magic. It is mechanics. Because belief is not just mental. It is electromagnetic. Every thought you think carries frequency. Every emotion you hold generates a signal. And when those signals repeat with coherence, with conviction, they form a pattern that the field begins to interpret as instruction. This is why belief cannot be faked. The field does not speak the language of pretending. It listens to what you repeat without knowing you're repeating it. So you must look deeper. You must examine what you believe not just about your goals, but about yourself, about life, about what's possible. Do you believe that you are supported by life, or punished by it? Do you believe that success is earned through alignment or through endless struggle? Do you believe that abundance is a birthright or a reward for suffering? Because these beliefs are not philosophical games. They are operating systems, silently determining which doors open, which remain closed, and which you walk past without ever noticing. And many of these beliefs are not even yours. They were inherited, absorbed, never chosen. You carry the scarcity of your parents, the fears of your culture, the limits of generations who never had the chance to question their stories. But you do. You have the chance right now to reprogram the signal you send into the field. To deconstruct the falsehoods. To rewrite the assumptions. To upgrade the architecture of your identity. Because belief is not just about the future. It is about what you allow yourself to receive now. If you believe you are only valuable when you're producing, you will reject rest. If you believe love must be earned through perfection, you will sabotage intimacy. If you believe money is evil or dangerous, you will unconsciously repel opportunities for wealth. You don't need to say it aloud. The field already knows. Your vibration tells the truth, even when your words do not. This is why your most sacred responsibility is not to shout affirmations into the void, but to align your nervous system with new belief. You must feel what it would be like to believe differently. You must experience it in your body, not just your mind. And then you must act from that frequency, again and again, until it becomes second nature. That is the prayer that works. That is the prayer that speaks. Because belief becomes prophecy. Not because the future is fixed, but because you are the filter through which infinite possibilities collapse into form. When your belief is rooted in fear, you distort the potential of your future before it has a chance to become real. When your belief is rooted in power, You give permission for miracles to normalize. This is not hype. This is quantum mechanics applied through human will. And it will cost you something, not your hope, but your old identity. Belief, when chosen consciously, burns away everything that contradicts it. It forces you to release the masks you used to survive. It demands that you stop hiding behind logic and convenience and finally step into the posture of someone who doesn't just want, but expects a different life. That's what true belief feels like. Not desperate, but definite. Not frantic, but calmly inevitable. Because when you believe fully, you stop seeking signs and start becoming them. You stop hoping and start transmitting. You stop asking the universe to save you, and start living as if the answer has already arrived. And that shift, internal, subtle, unwavering, is what reshapes the mirror of the world. So the question is not, can I have what I want? The question is, can I believe it into being not just in theory, but in every cell of my body, in every action I take, in every thought I repeat, until the field has no choice but to respond? Because in the end, belief is not the path to power. Belief is the power. Chapter 4. Clarity, cutting through the fog of frequency. There is a kind of distortion that is more dangerous than failure, more paralyzing than fear, and more expensive than any mistake you could make, and eso type de distorsión es y nemest confusi. Not because it screams, not because it breaks things loudly, but because it dulls you, because it creeps in quietly and convinces you that standing still is safer than moving forward in the wrong direction. Clarity is not a bonus. It is not a spiritual afterthought. It is the prerequisite for momentum. It is the lens through which power knows where to flow. And without it, the universe does not punish you. It simply waits. It waits for you to decide. It waits for you to focus the signal. It waits for the fog to lift. You can have the strongest mindset, the most powerful belief, and the deepest desire, but if you are aiming that energy at a blurred target, the result will never arrive. The field does not move for scattered intentions. It does not reward vague direction. It requires precision, not because it is cruel, but because it is exact. It mirrors the state of your inner world. If you are unclear, your life will reflect that ambiguity. If you are hesitant, your opportunities will hesitate. If you are divided inside, the field will divide outside. Clarity, then, is not a matter of motivation. It is a matter of alignment. It is the act of remembering what you are actually asking for. It is cutting through the noise of shoulds, obligations, fears, projections, distractions, and inherited goals, until all that remains is truth. And that truth, stripped of ego, of social conditioning, of the fear of judgment, becomes a laser. A single, undeniable point of intention that the universe can finally respond to with equal intensity. You see, the problem is not that you can't manifest what you want. The problem is that most people never define what they actually want. They pray for better circumstances but cannot describe what better looks like. They visualize success but cannot articulate the structure, the feeling, the shape of that success. They want freedom but are unclear on what freedom demands. And in that fog, they act. But their action is scattered, conflicted, constantly changing direction. And the field, obeying the law of resonance, sends back what is coherent with that internal chaos. Mixed signals, false starts, half-built lives. Clarity is how you collapse the wave of infinite possibility into a single line of reality. It is how you reduce the noise long enough to choose. It is how you separate your true desires from your survival patterns, and then begin to build accordingly. Because when clarity is present, decision becomes easier. Energy becomes focused. Time stops being wasted on battles that don't belong to you. You stop apologizing for saying no. You stop needing validation for your direction. You no longer look for confirmation because you are living the confirmation through every intentional step you take. The truth is, most people are not tired because they are doing too much. They are tired because they are doing too much of the wrong things, things that do not align with their values, their purpose, or their highest signal. Without clarity, effort becomes exhausting instead of empowering. Movement feels frantic instead of fulfilling. And this is where most burn out. Not from too much intensity, but from too little alignment. Think of the greatest creators, inventors, and leaders of history. What set them apart was not just skill or luck, it was clarity of vision. Steve Jobs didn't build Apple by trying to do everything for everyone. He had a singular obsession: simplicity, elegance, intuitive design. That clarity informed every product, every presentation, every decision. He wasn't merely building machines. He was building a world. And that world was so clearly defined that it pulled reality toward it like a magnetic field. Clarity is magnetic. When you get clear, people respond differently. Opportunities organize themselves around your conviction. Resources, ideas, collaborators begin to show up because your energy is no longer diffused across 100 fragmented wishes. It is focused. And in a quantum field, focus is power. Because energy flows where attention goes, and if your attention is divided, your future will be diluted. And here is the uncomfortable truth that few are willing to face: clarity often requires sacrifice. Not just of comfort, but of false identities, of outdated dreams, of lives you've outgrown. Clarity means looking at the path you're on and asking, is this mine? It means admitting when something you've been chasing no longer fits the person you're becoming. It means letting go of dreams that once gave you meaning, but now limit your expansion. And that letting go hurts, not because it's wrong, but because it's real. Growth is always preceded by pruning. But when you clear the space, mentally, emotionally, energetically, something profound happens. Your nervous system relaxes. Your decisions become cleaner. Your actions become lighter. You are no longer trying to prove yourself. You are simply executing on truth. And that truth, expressed in consistent, focused action, becomes your most powerful form of communication with the universe. This is what real prayer looks like in motion. Not words, but clarity. Not wishes, but direction. Not trying to force the universe to understand your confusion, but rising into such precision that the universe cannot mistake your frequency. So stop waiting for clarity to arrive like a lightning bolt. Clarity is not granted. It is forged. In silence. In reflection. In journaling, walking, subtracting. In saying no. In turning inward and asking, again and again, what matters now? What is mine to carry? What am I doing out of fear instead of truth? And then, when the answer comes, honor it. Live it. Protect it. Build around it. Because once you're clear, the field doesn't just hear you more clearly, it begins to respond immediately. Because you are no longer speaking two languages. You are no longer living in contradiction. You have become the signal. And the signal, once coherent, reshapes everything. Chapter 5. Vision, the physics of future in motion. There is a point beyond clarity, beyond mindset, beyond belief, where the self no longer operates solely by what it sees or understands, but by what it projects. A forward-facing force that is not yet real but refuses to be dismissed, a blueprint of the invisible that begins to shape the visible by the sheer intensity with which it is held. That force is vision, and it is not optional. It is not decorative. It is not a luxury for dreamers. It is the operating system of every life that refuses to settle for accident or inertia. Vision is not merely about seeing the future, it is about engineering it in advance, through mental architecture so vivid, so precise, so emotionally charged, that it begins to animate behavior long before results arrive. The reason most people remain trapped in cycles of frustration and stagnation is not because they lack effort, but because their effort is not aimed. They are sprinting in every direction, burning through time, energy, and resources with a kind of panicked urgency that feels like progress but delivers only exhaustion. Because where there is no vision, energy becomes erosion. Where there is no vision, decisions are reactive. Time is spent rather than invested. Life becomes a loop of managing circumstances instead of shaping them. Vision is not a motivational poster pinned to a wall. It is not a vague hope that something good might happen. Vision is an emotional technology, a living, breathing construct that must be built, clarified, and emotionally charged so intensely that it begins to override distraction, override fear, override the gravitational pull of mediocrity. Vision is what allows you to step into the next chapter of your life before the current one has even closed. It is how you begin to pull the future toward you, not as a fantasy, but as a structural inevitability. When Nikola Tesla visualized his inventions, he didn't sketch endlessly or test aimlessly. He would construct them mentally, down to the smallest detail, run them in his mind for hours or days, and refine their operation before ever touching a physical component. He wasn't just a brilliant engineer. He was a mental builder, a man who understood that reality is first formed in the dimension of the unseen, and that vision is not creative daydreaming but a form of cognitive command. Vision is a kind of sacred violence against entropy. It is the refusal to let life unfold without your fingerprints on its form. It says, "This is where I am going and this is who I must become to get there." It does not wait for permission. It does not ask if the timing is right. It informs your identity, your rituals, your values, your urgency. It doesn't just tell you what to pursue, it tells you what to ignore. And in a world addicted to noise and novelty, that kind of directional clarity is not just rare, it's revolutionary. But vision also demands confrontation. It forces you to face the gap between where you are and where you must go. And in that gap lives discomfort, the resistance, the temptation to lower the vision to fit the current version of yourself instead of rising into it. Most people give up here, not because the vision is too big, but because their self-concept is too small. But if you understand that vision is not about who you are, it is about who you're becoming, then that discomfort becomes fuel. It becomes a forge. It becomes the training ground for the identity required to hold the future you're building. And once you begin moving in alignment with vision, the universe responds in a language you begin to recognize not as coincidence, but as confirmation. Doors open not because you're lucky, but because you've become someone who knocks with conviction. Opportunities arise not because they were waiting for you, but because your frequency has changed to meet them. This is not superstition. This is pattern recognition. When your vision becomes emotionally embedded in your nervous system, your reticular activating system begins to filter the world accordingly. What you once ignored, you now notice. What you once feared, you now face. Not because the world has changed, but because your lens has. This is why vision cannot remain abstract. It must be documented, spoken, repeated, refined. It must become the mental environment you live in. Your future must feel so real that your present becomes intolerable unless it moves in its direction. Every thought, every action, every habit must be reoriented around this imagined certainty. And no, the world will not applaud this. Most people will call it delusion. They will say you've changed. And that's the point. Because if your vision doesn't make the current version of you uncomfortable, it's not vision, it's nostalgia. Look at those who changed the trajectory of human life. Not just the titans of industry, but the quiet revolutionaries, the writers, the teachers, the doctors, the inventors, the parents who said, "This ends with me," and meant it. What they had in common was not comfort. It was direction. It was a personal vision so real, so non-negotiable, that it reordered their time, their boundaries, their behavior, and eventually, the world around them. They were not waiting to see what life would offer. They were offering life something too clear to ignore. And that's what you must become. Not a person who hopes, but a person who transmits. Not someone who wishes for a better future, but someone who becomes dangerous to the present because your clarity disrupts its inertia. Your vision must become so alive inside you that even when nothing outside you supports it, you move forward anyway. Because movement is no longer dependent on circumstance. It is a function of your design. So do not water down your vision to fit the comfort zones of those who have chosen to live without one. Do not apologize for being able to see what others can't. That is the cost of being a builder. That is the burden of foresight. And yes, there will be isolation. Yes, there will be resistance. But if your vision is true, if it is tied not to ego, but to evolution, it will outlive that resistance. It will begin to organize your life with a kind of sacred inevitability. And that is when the quantum field begins to echo back not only who you are, but who you've decided to become. Because in a universe where energy precedes form, vision is not fantasy. Vision is physics in motion. Chapter 6. Purpose, the gravity that keeps you in orbit. There is a force beneath all forces, a current deeper than motivation, louder than passion, and more stable than inspiration. A kind of internal gravity that does not shout, but pulls. A presence in the background that cannot be ignored for long, even when buried beneath distraction, stress, and routine. It is not a fantasy or an ambition or a goal. It is purpose. And purpose is not something you chase. It is something you align with, something you remember, something that's been trying to speak through you your entire life, waiting for you to quiet the noise long enough to hear what has always been inside you. Purpose is not about what sounds impressive. It's not about achievement for the sake of recognition. It's not about climbing ladders that lean against walls that were never yours to begin with. Purpose is about belonging to your own existence, about anchoring into a truth so personal, so honest, so unshakably yours, that it begins to organize everything around it. The way gravity organizes planets into orbits, purpose organizes your life into alignment. It tells you what to say yes to, what to walk away from, what to build even when no one understands why you're building it. And without it, even success feels empty. This is why you see people reach the top of industries, only to implode emotionally, spiritually, mentally, because they climbed with discipline but without direction. They achieved goals that looked good on paper but had no root in their soul. Without purpose, achievement is just motion. It impresses, maybe, but it doesn't fulfill. Because fulfillment doesn't come from volume, it comes from alignment. And alignment is impossible without a clearly defined, deeply embodied sense of why. Purpose is what gets you through when everything else falls apart. It's what keeps you moving after the excitement dies. It is the one thing you return to when there is no applause, no validation, no momentum. Without it, discipline becomes torture. Without it, vision becomes fantasy. Without it, belief becomes noise. Purpose is the engine behind endurance, the structure behind strength, the reason you choose to rebuild when you have every excuse to give up. And here's what most people don't realize. Your purpose doesn't have to be grand in scale, but it must be grand in clarity. It doesn't have to save the world, but it has to matter enough to you that you're willing to suffer for it. Because anything truly worthwhile will cost you, not in dollars, but in comfort, in old versions of self, in relationships that were never meant to follow you into the next level. And if the reason behind your actions isn't anchored in something deeper than image or income, you will break under the weight of resistance. Purpose is the difference between quitting and recalibrating, between collapsing and adapting, between surviving and building. When you have purpose, you don't need to be convinced to show up, you crave it. You're not chasing goals for dopamine. You're answering a call. You're building something because it feels like betrayal not to. And that's what most people miss. Purpose isn't chosen because it's convenient. It's surrendered to because ignoring it becomes unbearable. And yes, it evolves. Purpose is not static. What calls to you at 20 may not be what sustains you at 40. But that evolution is guided by the same inner compass. And if you stay connected to that compass, you don't fear change, you initiate it. Because you know that when you're operating in alignment with purpose, even the chaos becomes sacred. Even the pain gains context. Even the delays start to feel like design. Think of Viktor Frankl, imprisoned in a concentration camp, stripped of everything except the one thing no captor could touch, his will to assign meaning. He found purpose not despite suffering but through it. He discovered that those who could endure were not the physically strongest, but those with a clear answer to the question, why must I survive? And from that crucible came a philosophy that still saves lives. This is not metaphor. This is not poetry. This is proof that purpose is stronger than circumstance, and that meaning is a survival mechanism, not just a luxury for philosophers. Purpose is not an abstract concept. It is a daily filter. It determines what habits you keep, what people you trust, what systems you build. It protects you from distraction because when something does not align with your purpose, you no longer need permission to say no. You simply know it's not for you. You feel it in your nervous system. And that inner knowing becomes your compass in the dark. You stop looking outside for direction. You stop needing consensus. You stop craving permission. Because you have something stronger, a sense of internal inevitability that turns silence into signal, confusion into clarity, and suffering into structure. So if you feel lost, don't start by chasing opportunity. Start by asking deeper questions. What enrages you? What heals you? What would you do if no one applauded? What injustice feels personal to you? What beauty moves you beyond logic? What are you willing to protect, to rebuild, to sacrifice for even when it hurts? That's where purpose begins. Not in perfection. In proximity. In emotional truth. In radical self-awareness. In choosing to live not based on what the world pays best, but based on what your soul cannot ignore. And once you begin living from that place, once you stop chasing a life that looks good and start building one that feels aligned, you will begin to experience a new form of momentum. Not the kind that burns fast and dies, but the kind that builds, slowly, structurally, permanently. Because now, you are no longer scattered. You are centered. And from center, you can create anything. Purpose is not a destination. It is the gravity that keeps you in orbit when the chaos of the world tries to pull you off course. And when you have it, you no longer just speak to the universe. You live as a response to its highest calling. Chapter 7. Discipline, the sacred repetition that builds identity. If purpose is the gravity that holds you in orbit, then discipline is the engine that keeps you moving forward in that orbit, step by step, hour by hour, often without applause, without recognition, and without the instant feedback modern life has trained us to crave. Discipline is not punishment. It is not drudgery. It is not an outdated form of control from a bygone era of suffering and rigidity. Discipline is devotion in motion. It is the structure that allows your vision to take form in the world of matter. It is the sacred repetition of intention that transforms potential into identity, not through intensity, but through consistency. Discipline is what separates the dreamer from the architect, the believer from the builder, the hopeful from the inevitable. There is a moment in every journey where excitement fades, where the emotional high of inspiration gives way to monotony, where results are delayed and motivation vanishes. That moment is where most people stop, not because they are weak, but because they've been taught to believe that feeling like doing something is a prerequisite for doing it. But those who truly reshape the world, in business, in art, in science, in spirit, are those who move anyway, who show up anyway, who perform the necessary action without needing to be entertained by it. They are not controlled by their moods. They are led by their mission. And that is discipline, the ability to choose action in alignment with your future, regardless of your present emotional weather. Discipline is how the invisible becomes visible. It is how a vague desire becomes a sharpened skill. It is how a prayer becomes a process. Every ritual, every system, every standard you impose upon yourself, not from self-hatred or fear, but from alignment and integrity, becomes a signal to the universe that you are ready for more. You are no longer simply wishing. You are preparing. You are organizing your life to receive. And the field does not reward random effort. It rewards structure, coherence, continuity. The moment you begin showing up for your future with precision, the energy around you begins to shift, because you are now speaking in the only language creation truly understands: repetition over time with intention. Think of the builders of history, the ones who shaped civilizations, disrupted industries, rewrote paradigms. They didn't just have vision. They had ritual. They had systems that anchored their genius to earth. Thomas Edison famously worked over 100 hours a week, not because he was a masochist, but because he trained his creativity to emerge on command. His discipline wasn't just physical. It was spiritual. It was the knowledge that brilliance is not a lightning bolt. It is a current you must wire your life to receive. It is not found. It is earned through structure. Discipline is the highest form of self-respect. It says, I value my future self too much to betray them with present comfort. It's not glamorous. It rarely feels good in the moment. It is the early wake-up. The workout when no one's watching. The script revision at midnight. The phone call you don't want to make. The practice when you're exhausted. The strategy meeting you attend after failure. It is boring. It is repetitive. And that is exactly why it works. Because in a world obsessed with novelty, consistency becomes leverage. It builds compound momentum. It builds emotional immunity. It builds identity, and identity is what determines behavior long after inspiration fades. And this is the deeper truth. Discipline is not something you do. It's someone you become. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, you prove to your nervous system that you are someone who follows through. Every time you honor your own word, you tell your subconscious that you are safe to trust. And that trust builds a feedback loop of integrity. You stop questioning your own ability. You stop debating your own decisions. You stop outsourcing your accountability to the external world. You become self-regulating. And that internal regulation, that quiet, daily calibration of self to standard, becomes your advantage in a world addicted to chaos. But to live like this, you must shed the fantasy of balance. You must accept that not all days will feel good, and that feelings are not the measure of alignment. Emotion is data, yes. But discipline is the structure that holds you steady when that data becomes noisy. And your job is not to be constantly inspired. Your job is to become someone who acts in accordance with a higher vision, especially when it's inconvenient. Because the greatest breakthroughs come not in the moments of hype, but in the quiet accumulation of effort that seems to go unnoticed by the world, until suddenly they cannot ignore you, until the result arrives not by accident, but by design. Discipline is the invisible scaffolding behind every overnight success story. It is the unglamorous lineage of all greatness. And if you look closely, you'll see the patterns. The writer who wrote when no one was reading, the entrepreneur who built when no one was watching, the leader who served when no one was applauding. There is no substitute. There is no shortcut. There is only this. Who are you when no one's watching? Who are you when it's hard? Who are you when it's boring? Who are you when it's lonely? That is the real test. And your answer is found not in what you say, but in what you repeat. Discipline is not rigid. It is not harsh. It is not cold. True discipline is compassionate. It says, I believe in myself enough to not let temporary discomfort dictate my future. It says, I love my vision enough to defend it from the sabotage of ease. And it is in this defense, silent, private, relentless, that lives are built, empires are born, and impossible things become inevitable. So don't wait for it to feel right. Train until it becomes who you are. Because in the quantum field, the pattern you repeat is the prayer you live. Chapter 8. Action, the translation of thought into force. At some point in every transformation, the conversation must end. The planning must stop. The vision board must be taken off the wall, and the words must become motion. Because no matter how powerful your mindset, how pure your belief, how clear your vision or noble your purpose, until you move, until you act, until you translate all of it into kinetic, tangible force in the physical world, it remains potential. Energy stored but not expressed. A possibility that lives only in the realm of intention, waiting to be sculpted into form by the one thing that finally proves to the universe you are not just dreaming, you are becoming. Action is the bridge. It is the only bridge. The only thing that separates the imagined from the embodied. The only process by which the internal begins to press against the external and say, I exist. I matter. I am ready to meet the world, not as an idea, but as a force. And the world responds, not to hope, not to theory, not to emotion, but to force applied with direction. You can write the most beautiful vision. You can meditate on your purpose. You can raise your frequency and align your mindset, and you should. But none of it matters if you are not willing to walk into the fire of execution. Because the universe, for all its mystery, does not bend for thought alone. It bends for thought in motion. Action is not just doing. It is declaring with your body what your mouth can no longer carry. It is proof of belief. It is the final signature on the contract between you and your future. It says, I trust what I have imagined enough to begin building it without guarantee. And that single decision, to begin before you feel ready, to move before the path is clear, to act even when no one is watching, is what separates the rare few who create their life from the many who merely experience it. But the challenge is this: action reveals the truth. It reveals how serious you really are. It exposes the gap between what you say and what you're willing to endure. It doesn't flatter you. It tests you. And that is why it is avoided. Because once you act, there is nowhere to hide. You are either building or you're not. You are either moving or you're not. You are either honoring your vision with action or betraying it with delay. And delay, let us be clear, is the most seductive form of self-doubt. It wears the mask of waiting for the right moment. It sounds reasonable, even wise. But it is usually fear in disguise. Fear of failure, fear of exposure, fear that you will be seen trying and not succeeding. But the paradox is brutal and beautiful. The only way to get better is to begin. The only way to become undeniable is to be willing to look unsure at the start. Edison didn't wait for certainty. Carnegie didn't wait for a perfect economy. Oprah didn't wait for acceptance. None of them waited. They moved. And through that movement, they shaped momentum. Through that momentum, they attracted clarity. And through that clarity, they refined power. Because action is not the end of the process, it is the beginning of feedback. And feedback is how we evolve. You cannot course correct if you never take the first step. You cannot improve a plan that exists only in your head. You cannot be found if you never enter the field. Action brings friction, yes, but friction is the cost of real progress. Without it, you are just rehearsing identity, fantasizing achievement, living inside imagined possibilities while the real world remains untouched by your genius. And the thing is, you already know what you need to do. You've known for a while. The conversation you're avoiding. The application you keep postponing. The project you've outlined but haven't launched. The habit you keep promising to start next week. Your resistance is not due to ignorance. It is due to the discomfort of commitment. Because once you move, the illusion ends. You are now accountable to your future, to your integrity, to your word. But here's the truth most never hear. Action does not require full confidence. It only requires decision. You can act afraid. You can act uncertain. You can act with trembling hands and a mind full of what-ifs. What matters is that you act anyway. Because once you do, once your body moves in the direction of your intention, something extraordinary begins to happen. You start generating a new signal. A signal not of potential but of embodiment. And that signal is what activates the field. You were never meant to think your way into a new life. You were meant to move your way into one. Because in motion, identity shifts. In repetition, belief is reinforced. In failure, data is gathered. And in every single attempt, no matter how awkward or imperfect, you are shaping the vessel that will eventually hold your next evolution. So stop waiting for a sign. You are the sign. Stop waiting for a guarantee. Movement is the guarantee. Stop waiting for perfection. Perfection is the enemy of growth. The ones who build empires, legacies, revolutions, they start with imperfect steps taken with perfect conviction. They trust that clarity will come as they go. And it does. Because the universe, in its precise, elegant design, does not reward hesitation. It rewards alignment in motion. So walk. Even if the ground is unfamiliar. Even if your voice shakes. Begin. Even if you must build as you go. Because the most powerful prayer you will ever offer is not a phrase whispered in stillness. It is a choice, executed boldly and repeated until the world must respond. Chapter 9. Gratitude, the frequency of receiving. There is a critical misunderstanding in the way the world treats gratitude. Most think of it as something reactive, something expressed after life gives you what you asked for, after the achievement has been unlocked, after the storm has passed, when you finally feel safe enough, secure enough, happy enough to pause and say, "Thank you." But this understanding is not only limited, it is backward. Because gratitude, in its purest and most transformative form, is not something that follows receiving. It is the mechanism that allows receiving to begin. It is not the emotional response to what has arrived. It is the energetic frequency that permits arrival in the first place. The quantum field is not responsive to the words you say, or even the pictures you imagine, nearly as much as it is responsive to the vibration you embody. Gratitude is not a soft emotion. It is a power state. It is the signal of wholeness. And wholeness is what tells the field, I have already become the version of myself who receives this. I do not seek to be filled, I am full, and from that fullness, I attract more. It is easy to ask the universe for more money, more peace, more love, more success, while subconsciously reinforcing a frequency of lack. And this is why many people's prayers never materialize, not because they are unworthy, but because their energy contradicts their request. You cannot broadcast "not enough" and expect to receive more. The field doesn't respond to want, it responds to state. And the most magnetic state you can embody is the state of already having. Not because you are lying to yourself, but because you understand that gratitude is energetic alignment, not mental fantasy. When you train your system, your mind, your emotions, your nervous system, to operate from gratitude before the breakthrough, before the evidence, before the validation, you become a tuning fork for every timeline that corresponds to that frequency. Your entire being tells reality, I am no longer seeking. I am available. And in that availability, life begins to move. But this is not natural for most. Because we have been taught that gratitude must be earned. That we are not allowed to feel it until some external condition is met. That we must wait for proof before we relax into joy. And in doing so, we create a loop where our happiness is always delayed, always deferred, always one outcome away. But the most powerful beings on this planet, the ones who magnetize success, love, connection, creativity, are the ones who have learned how to feel now what most people wait their entire lives to feel later. They are not naive. They are not faking. They have learned how to embody the end result as a present emotional experience, and that embodiment is what shortcuts the distance between now and then. You do not manifest what you chase. You manifest what you are. And if you are still waiting to feel grateful until things change, you will trap yourself in a timeline of delay, because that very posture sends a message to the field. This moment is not enough. I am incomplete. I am still separate from what I desire. And the field, obeying the law of resonance, returns more separation, more delay, more waiting. Gratitude is not spiritual decoration. It is the closing of the circuit. It tells the field, I am already in the vibration of having. I already know what it feels like to live this reality. I already breathe as if it's done. I already carry myself as the one who has received. And in that signal, time collapses. Distance dissolves. The need to control disappears. Because you have already become the answer. And yes, this is a discipline. It is not about ignoring difficulty or pretending everything is perfect. It is about locating power in every condition. It is about choosing to notice what is working. Choosing to expand your awareness to include what supports you, even when other things are falling apart. It is about reclaiming attention and redirecting it from fear, from lack, from urgency, and pointing it toward the undeniable reality that something is always functioning in your favor, if you will train yourself to see it. Look at the lives of those who survived the unimaginable. Nelson Mandela, locked in prison for decades, still walking out with dignity and a spirit unbroken. Holocaust survivors who lost entire families, entire worlds, and yet still found beauty in a sunrise. Innovators who failed hundreds of times and still gave thanks for the next opportunity to try again. This is not spiritual bypassing. This is energetic precision. It is the choice to stay in alignment with life even when life is testing your definition of what deserves gratitude. Because once you realize that gratitude is not the result of success but the prerequisite for it, everything changes. You stop withholding appreciation until the world meets your demands. You stop treating joy as a prize and start treating it as a strategy. You begin to see that every second spent in complaint, comparison, or resentment is a vote for the timeline in which you continue to wait. But every second spent in genuine gratitude, for your breath, your mind, your resilience, your lessons, your vision, your capacity to begin again, is a vote for the timeline where everything you desire is already on its way to you. And that is the great irony. Those who appear to have the most are not always those who are receiving more, they are simply the ones who have learned how to notice what they already have. Their ability to receive more is rooted in their ability to recognize more. They see opportunity in difficulty. They feel abundance even while building it. They experience love before it arrives externally, because they understand that the external is just a mirror of the internal signal, and that signal is calibrated through gratitude. This is not emotional fluff. This is frequency mechanics. This is the technology of receptivity. Gratitude turns the I hope into I remember. It turns someday into already. It turns prayer into presence. So if you truly want to master the art of quantum creation, if you truly want to speak with the universe and be understood, stop asking for more and start becoming someone who can hold more. Start becoming someone who sees clearly, who honors what is already here, who trains their nervous system to relax into the timeline where nothing is missing. And from that place of inner wholeness, watch how reality shifts to match you, not because you begged, but because you became the answer. The future doesn't arrive when you're ready. It arrives when you're grateful enough to receive it. Chapter 10. Adaptability, rewiring the self to withstand evolution. There is a hidden law of progress that no one tells you at the beginning. A law more merciless than time, more confrontational than failure, more honest than the people you love. That law is this: what got you here will not get you there. The beliefs that built the first level of your success will suffocate the next one. The identity that helped you survive your last season will sabotage the next if left unchanged. Growth is not just about gaining, it is equally, sometimes more so, about releasing. And the process of release, of unlearning, of dismantling old structures of thought and behavior that once served you but no longer fit, is called adaptability. Adaptability is not weakness. It is not compromise. It is not a betrayal of self. It is the evolution of self. It is not the surrender of principles, but the surrender of patterns that were born from lesser versions of you, from versions that did not have your current awareness, your current clarity, your current capacity. Adaptability is not a reaction. It is a strategy. It is the art of bending without breaking, of shifting shape while preserving essence, of moving with the winds of change not because you are fickle, but because you are precise. And those who fail to adapt, not once, but constantly, are not defeated by the world. They are defeated by the weight of their own outdated identity. The reason most people struggle with transformation is not because they lack effort, discipline, or even vision. It's because they're trying to build a new future with a version of themselves that was never meant to hold it. They are clinging to frameworks that made sense when they were surviving, hustling, proving themselves, but now act as constraints in the space where expansion is trying to happen. But adaptability requires ego death. It demands that you step into the painful realization that you've outgrown your current operating system, that you've optimized for a life you no longer want. And in that moment, the only way forward is to let go of what feels safe so that you can become what is necessary. This is not a surface shift. Adaptability is not about pivoting careers, moving to a new city, or changing your habits for a week. Those are expressions. But true adaptability happens deeper, in the nervous system, in the core assumptions you carry about who you are and what is possible. It is rewiring at the level of identity. And it hurts, because it will demand that you reintroduce yourself to the world, knowing full well that some people will only know how to love who you used to be. But if you keep choosing to be the version of yourself that makes other people comfortable, you will remain a prisoner to their memory and miss your emergence. Look at any system in nature that survives: trees that bend in the wind, animals that shift environments, cells that mutate to survive hostile conditions, and you will see one thing: adaptation is not optional. It is the prerequisite for continuity. And what nature does unconsciously, you must learn to do consciously. To become flexible, fluid, yet grounded in what matters most. You must stop confusing structure with rigidity. Discipline is sacred, yes, but discipline without adaptability becomes dogma. And dogma kills growth. Dogma says, "This is who I am." Adaptability says, "This is who I must become now." And the key to adaptability is not external awareness, it's internal permission. You must give yourself permission to change your mind, to evolve your standards, to refine your voice, to outgrow your tribe, to pivot your priorities not because you're unstable, but because you're finally honest. People will call you inconsistent when you change. Let them. It is better to be accused of contradiction than sentenced to stagnation. Because the cost of remaining who you were is far greater than the cost of becoming who you need to be. There is no fixed self. That was the illusion you were taught, that you must pick a lane, a label, a path, and stay there forever. But the soul is fluid intelligence. It is meant to expand, to contract, to learn, to break, to rebuild. Your job is not to stay the same. Your job is to become so deeply aligned with truth that you are willing to sacrifice your current version for the one on the other side of transformation. That is not chaos. That is integrity in motion. And here is the part that breaks most people open. In the process of deep adaptation, you will lose things. You will lose people, comfort, frameworks, ideologies, patterns that once gave you meaning. And it will feel like death, because it is. But what dies is not your soul. It is the shell. The version of you that was required for the previous chapter. And once that shell breaks, what emerges is not just a better version. It is a truer version, one that has been waiting underneath your coping, your patterns, your narratives, your justifications, your fears. Adaptability, at this level, is not reactive. It is proactive. It is how leaders stay relevant, how creators remain inspired, how movements stay alive. It is what allows you to live in real time, responding to reality as it is, not as you wish it were. It lets you course correct with speed instead of shame. It allows you to absorb new information without defensiveness. It gives you the capacity to face complexity without collapse. And perhaps most powerfully, it allows you to release the identity that suffering taught you to wear. That is the ultimate act of liberation, to say, I am allowed to be different now. Not better, not more impressive, just different. And in that difference, new space opens. You begin to hear possibilities you couldn't hear before. You begin to see routes you couldn't see before. You begin to attract relationships, ideas, experiences that were previously invisible to the older version of you. Because you are no longer operating from survival, you are operating from expansion. You are no longer reinforcing the past, you are encoding the future. Adaptability is the skill of the timeless. Those who master it never become irrelevant. They are never paralyzed by change. They do not fear reinvention. They welcome it, because they know that at every stage of life, a new version of self is waiting, not to betray who they were, but to fulfill what they could not. So when the winds of change arrive, as they always do not resist. Do not cling. Do not mourn the architecture that was never meant to hold the next season. Instead, breathe, listen, adjust, and become. Because in the language of quantum becoming, adaptability is the syntax of expansion. Chapter 11. Resilience, the return from ruin as revelation. There comes a point in every life where the structure breaks, not metaphorically, but viscerally. Where the business fails, the relationship dissolves, the health deteriorates, the dream evaporates, or the illusion that once held your life together finally shatters under the pressure of accumulated reality. In those moments, everything inside you becomes loud. Panic, confusion, disbelief, grief, shame, rage, and perhaps worst of all, silence. The silence of not knowing who you are anymore. Of watching your former self die in real time and having no clear instruction on how to rebuild from the ash. And yet, those moments, as brutal and uninvited as they are, mark the beginning of something far more powerful than success. They mark the birth of resilience, not as a trait, but as a new identity forged through confrontation with collapse. Because resilience is not about getting back to who you were. It's not about recovery in the traditional sense. It's not a return, it's a revelation. It is the creation of a new self that could not have existed had the old one not been broken. And this is what most people don't understand about transformation. The shattering was not the end. It was the permission slip for a deeper truth to finally emerge. Resilience is not your ability to avoid the fall. It is your ability to extract power from it. In a world addicted to performance and appearances, where strength is often mistaken for perfection and vulnerability is interpreted as weakness, we forget that some of the most potent human qualities, wisdom, compassion, humility, grounded confidence, are born only after something precious is lost. There are insights that cannot be accessed until failure occurs. There is a kind of knowing that only emerges after plans fail and control dissolves. You can read every book, attend every seminar, recite every affirmation, but until you've been taken apart by life, until you've been brought to your knees, and until you've had to rebuild with fewer illusions and more truth, you will not fully know what you're capable of. Resilience is not brute strength. It is sacred reconfiguration. It is not the loud scream of defiance. It is the quiet, deliberate act of continuing, of waking up the next day when nothing makes sense, of showing up for yourself when no one is clapping, of deciding to be kind even when your heart is raw, of breathing one decision at a time into a future that has not yet shown itself, because deep down, something unkillable inside you whispers, "There's more." And that whisper, that quiet refusal to surrender to despair, is not ordinary. It is cosmic. It is not just your biology trying to survive. It is your soul remembering its assignment. It is the frequency of continuity, the echo of the infinite that lives in all things that were built to evolve. Because resilience is the evolutionary signature of everything that lasts. Trees bend with the storm. Oceans reshape coastlines. Species mutate to survive. And humans, when they choose to face pain instead of running from it, restructure themselves into something wiser than who they were before. But this process is not romantic. It's not beautiful while it's happening. It is often messy, isolating, and invisible. That's what makes it sacred. You cannot fake resilience. You cannot download it from a podcast. You earn it in the shadows, when no one is watching, when everything in you wants to give up and the only thing you can do is move forward 1 inch at a time. It is built in the repetitions of self-trust, not when life is generous, but when it is unforgiving. Think of Abraham Lincoln, riddled with depression, defeated in election after election, haunted by loss, doubted by his peers, and yet, each time, returning. Returning not as the same man, but as one who had tempered his character through hardship. Or Harriet Tubman, who escaped slavery only to return again and again, through the jaws of death, to lead others to freedom, not because she wasn't afraid, but because her purpose was stronger than her pain. These people were not special in biology. They were resilient in structure. They had forged their minds to carry weight that would crush others, not because they had never broken, but because they knew how to rebuild. This is the deeper truth of resilience. It is learned. It is trained. It is constructed, thought by thought, response by response, moment by moment. Every time you decide to respond differently to the pain, every time you hold yourself with compassion instead of judgment, every time you refuse to let bitterness calcify your hope, you are teaching your system that it is stronger than the wound, that the story is not over, that the fracture is not final. And perhaps the most beautiful part? The scar you carry, the one you once hid, the one you thought disqualified you, becomes the very mark of credibility. Not because pain is noble in itself, but because healing is proof of capacity. People trust those who have rebuilt. People follow those who have fallen and returned. People are moved not by perfection, but by earned wisdom. And every time you survive with grace, every time you alchemize loss into perspective, every time you re-emerge from the rubble without losing your soul, you earn the right to speak with a voice that resonates at a frequency others cannot fake. So no, resilience is not about bouncing back. You don't return to normal after your soul has been restructured. You don't patch the wound and pretend it never happened. You build new architecture around the scar. You honor it. You let it remind you of what you've survived and of what you'll never tolerate again. And in doing so, you become unbreakable not because you are hard, but because you are true, flexible, aware, grounded, alive. And from that place, not of triumph, but of truth, your signal changes. The universe hears you differently. You walk with a quieter authority. You no longer beg life to be easier. You have become the one who can carry more. Resilience, then, is not the end of the breakdown. It is the beginning of your deeper voice. Chapter 12. Learning, the infinite ascent beyond arrival. If there is one principle that lives beneath every revolution of the human spirit, beneath discipline, beneath vision, beneath resilience and even belief, it is the quiet, lifelong, infinitely powerful act of learning. Not the kind of learning that fills the mind with facts, but the kind that dismantles illusion. The kind that burns away false certainty and leaves you standing, not with answers, but with capacity. Learning at this level is not intellectual. It is existential. It is the continual death of who you were and the conscious reassembly of who you are becoming. It is not what you know. It is how deeply you are willing to unknow what no longer serves you. Learning is the purest expression of humility, the admission that no matter how far you've come, you are still at the beginning. That wisdom is not a destination, but a practice. That truth is not something you capture, but something you follow. And in a world obsessed with being right, being done, being finished, being seen as experts or masters or thought leaders, real learning is rebellion. It is the refusal to close your mind around conclusions simply because they feel safe. It is the sacred discipline of staying open, not to everything, but to what has the power to refine you. Because the version of you that reached one summit is not equipped to build the next. The strategies that worked at level 3 will fail at level 7. The ideas that brought you success will eventually become cages if you do not evolve them. And this is the secret most never hear. Growth is not about perfection. Growth is about release. And learning is the only mechanism through which you can continuously let go of outdated maps and build new ones in real time. But to do this, to truly live as a learner, you must abandon the illusion that there is an arrival. There is no arrival. No point at which you will have everything figured out. No moment where you will be fully evolved, untouchable, complete. The myth of arrival is what paralyzes creators, leaders, artists, and visionaries. This lie that one day, you will become the final version of yourself, and all the chaos will quiet. But life does not reward the finished. It rewards the fluid. And those who live in continuous learning are the ones who remain free, because they are no longer protecting a version of themselves. They are sculpting themselves daily. Einstein once said, "The more I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know." That wasn't modesty. That was clarity. Because when your mind is no longer obsessed with defending its identity, it can finally expand. When your ego stops needing to be seen as certain, you can finally evolve without resistance. Learning becomes your default state, not as a student of facts, but as a sculptor of self. Every conversation becomes a mirror. Every failure becomes a textbook. Every emotion becomes a portal. Every contradiction becomes a clue. And the most transformative learners are not those who collect information. They are those who allow the information to change them. They integrate. They embody. They test and they adjust. They are not afraid of being wrong, because being wrong is no longer an attack. It's an invitation. An opening. A flash of light that says, "This version of you has reached its edge. Time to go deeper." And so they go. Without apology. Without shame. Without attachment to yesterday's title or philosophy or persona. Because the only thing they worship is the truth that emerges when ego falls away. Learning is the ultimate meta-skill. It is the engine behind all other strengths. Without it, discipline becomes rigid. Without it, vision becomes outdated. Without it, resilience becomes martyrdom. Without it, gratitude becomes spiritual performance. Learning is what keeps all your systems alive. Because it keeps you alive, not just biologically, but consciously, fully, fluidly, awake. And the moment you stop learning, not because you can't, but because you've chosen comfort over curiosity, that is the moment life begins to close around you. Your relationships stagnate. Your business plateaus. Your creativity withers. Not because you are no longer talented or worthy, but because your model of reality has become fixed, and the world no longer fits inside it. And if you refuse to update that model, the pain will arrive, not to punish you, but to get your attention, to wake you up, to break your knowing and return you to learning. This is why failure, embarrassment, rejection, and crisis can become gifts if you are trained to learn. Because instead of resisting them, you extract data. You extract truth. You don't spiral into identity collapse. You ask better questions. You become a more nuanced thinker, a more emotionally literate human, a more agile creator, Because you are no longer obsessed with control. You are devoted to understanding. And it is in this devotion, this humble, hungry, daily act of refinement, that your power compounds. You learn how to think beyond reaction. You learn how to build beyond imitation. You learn how to resource yourself from within, no longer waiting for the world to approve your evolution, but choosing it every day as your way of being. And from that place, from the frequency of continuous becoming, the universe listens differently. Not because you are perfect, but because you are in process. Because your signal is no longer static. It is alive. And that aliveness, that willingness to learn, is what keeps the quantum conversation open. The channel clear. The code flowing. The timelines flexible. Because you are not locked in any outcome. You are engaged in the unfolding. So do not rush to complete yourself. Do not cling to what you think you know. Do not armor your identity with past achievements or fixed roles. Stay open. Stay learning. Stay humble enough to release what once worked, and brave enough to try what might. Because this is not about mastering a technique. This is about becoming a person the universe can trust to evolve. And when you become that, not just once, but endlessly, you enter a new contract with creation itself. No longer one who asks, but one who listens. One who receives. One who creates. Not because you have arrived, but because you have remembered that there is no arrival, only ascent. And with that, the voice quiets, but the signal remains. You now know how to speak with the universe. More importantly, you now know how to listen. Not with ears, but with frequency. Not with force, but with alignment. Because this was never about a secret prayer. This was about becoming someone whose life is the prayer. And that prayer? It's being answered in motion. Right now.